Well, guys, before we get into story time, like I teased you with this. So this past weekend, I think I watched possibly the worst movie I've ever seen. It's definitely hands down the most boring movie I've ever seen.
Have you ever watched The Room?
I have not, but you know what? I would much rather watch The Room. Okay, so the way this came about is there's this magazine I've never heard about, this British film magazine called Sight and Sound, which I guess has been around for a very long time. And starting in 1952, they polled a large group. I don't know who's all in it. Like a lot of movie critics, directors, like maybe actors. I don't know, but a lot of people involved with the film industry. And they basically have them. They compiled the 100 greatest films of all time, according to this voting body, right? And so the first one was in 1952. I remember starting in 1962, their top movie was Citizen Kane. And that remained the same all the way through their 2012 poll.
Man.
Right? And like the other top 10, changed up a little bit, but a lot of the same ones were in there, whatever. Right. But a couple months ago, they did their 2022, vote. And this movie, and I'm not even sure exactly how to pronounce it. I believe it's called Jeanne Dielman, or maybe Jeanne Dielman. It's like the lead woman character's name.
Okay.
And it kind of took the world by storm because like myself and a lot of people, I've never heard of this movie. Like, Citizen Kane. Oh, I've actually seen Citizen Kane, but even like a lot of the other movies on there are movies I've at least heard of if I haven't seen them, But this movie, I'm like, never heard of it. But I was trolling through HBO. And it was on there. So I was like, oh, the greatest movie of all time. Maybe I should check this out.
So this was number one, like last year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, their list of the single greatest movie of all time. Now, I was a little hesitant to even start it because it's a 3.5 hour long movie.
Okay, that's a good stretch, yeah.
Longer than Avatar. So here's the thing. I want to be somewhat constructive in my criticism, not just curse this movie out.
So starting, we know you think it's horrible. At some point where you're like, is it me? Do I have bad taste?
Well, here's the thing. I was thinking about bowing out and just stopping it. But then I was like, well, if I talk about it on the podcast, people are going to be like, well, you didn't wait to you didn't get to the end. So I'm like, you know what?
You quit right before the gold.
Right. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stick with it. By the way, I would love you guys just to watch the first 10 to 15 minutes of this movie.
3.5 hours.
Just watch the first 10 to 15, just so you'll have a brand new respect for
it.
I
did see. I did see Avatar though this week.
Oh, you did?
I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Okay, after this we'll talk about that. Oh, my stupid phone alarm that I always forget about. So basically, the premise of this movie, I think if you look at HBO, their description. By the way, this movie is it's foreign. It's like Belgium, I think. Takes place in Belgium anyway. I don't know. Basically, it's about this widow who turns to prostitution in order to provide for her family.
I may have heard of this.
Okay. So here's the thing. That sounds somewhat interesting, right?
Right.
But here's what the movie is for the most part. First of all, the camera is always in it. I mean, it switches location, but the camera is always static. So the camera never moves. You're always looking at one, fixed point. And you follow this woman, and the whole movie is her doing menial tasks. I'm not kidding. So, these are some of the scenes in the movie. 5 minutes of her washing dishes. 5 minutes of her cooking. There's several different cooking scenes. 5 minutes of her eating soup with her son in almost silence. Twice.
Her gotta have seconds.
Her making the bed for 5 minutes. Her, just menial task after menial task.
Sure you didn't watch like a home ec movie or something?
Oh my God, it's so brutal.
You watched the wrong version.
So here's the thing: I'm watching this. I'm like, this cannot be what this movie is. By the way, like, as I'm watching it, I'm like, how? At a certain point, I'm like, how can this movie possibly redeem itself? Like. And here's the thing, and I wrote this down because this movie fails on like just a basic storytelling because there's no conflict in this movie, or at least arguably very little, because you're watching this and basically, basically the movie covers 3 days in this woman's very boring life, and like the only kind of difference is as you get to from day 1 to 2 to 3 is you kind of see like the drudgery of her routine starts to
so
get
you were
to her.
actually feeling the horribleness of everyday life, just like every day.
Yeah, there's no escapism. in
Exactly
this
what you're
movie.
trying to escape from.
Yeah, there's no escapism in this movie at all. So like, but like on day 2, like maybe like her hair like gets a little messed up and you're like, oh, she like, and then day 3, like she forgets to like button a button on her vest or whatever. And she forgets a step in her routine. So like, you're like, okay, I see this like very slight thing that shows like her routine is starting to get to her or whatever. Right. Now, as far as the prostitution thing, so basically, there's 3 Johns in the whole movie that come and visit her, but even this is done like very like prim and proper. Like she takes their coat or whatever. They go to the room. You just see like the door closes. Then they come out. She gives back the coat and whatever. They pay her whatever, you know. Except, and I'll get to it. The very last John, there's a little more to it. So yeah, there almost no conflict in the movie. I put no editing. There's no editing at all. That's why the movie is 3.5 goddamn hours long.
They're like, we're just gonna. It's all just like straight 5-minute shots of.
Exactly, and that's the thing.
It's like, how do you cut anything out of that?
Here's the thing that bothers me. This movie, and it would still be terrible, but it's 3.5. You could easily cut out 2.5 to 2.5 hours of this movie and still have all the same scenes if you just cut down like 5 minutes of her washing dishes to 3 minutes of her washing dishes. Like, we get it. It's boring. Move on. But here's what I'm getting at. So I was so like flummoxed that somebody. First of all, I don't believe this is anyone's favorite movie. And that's what I'm getting to is
Like, what? How did this come to happen?
Exactly. How did this happen? Because here's the thing, like, you know what this reminded me of is like, you know those really like pretentious art galleries where like there'll be like a real basic painting, like that's just like nothing but a red square, and somebody will be like, oh, I get it, the red, it represents fascism, and the little white border represents us oppressed that are being like squeezed out and all this kind of bullshit.
It's like when they vote the retard as prom king.
And I'm just like,
Demonetized.
yeah, Greg, you ruined this segment. But I'm just like, what is the red square like excuse like somebody made for this movie? Because that's what I think happened. I have nothing to back this up, but I think somebody prominent in the community wrote an article about how this movie is actually brilliant and how it's like an unappreciated gem or something, and then all the people voting for this went like, oh, whoever wrote this makes a great point, I'm gonna vote for this movie. I think there's some groupthink going on.
Yeah.
Because
It's like
again,
Prince John's clothes.
I cannot express without any. I find this movie putrid. I really do. The whole thing was excruciating. I honestly, and here's the thing that bothers me is I know if I express this to like people who defend this movie, they'd be like, "Well, that's the point. You need to watch all these 5-minute things because otherwise the drudgery of real life doesn't come through." I'm like, God. And the other thing is, when this woman, like, because there are scenes where she like leaves her, most of it's shot in her apartment, but there's various times where she does like leave the apartment and go on different errands, including like watching her 5 minutes in line at the bank. It's God, I hated this movie. And she takes the elevator, from her building. You watch her take the elevator probably a minimum of 15 times in this movie. And you have to watch her do it because we can't edit that out. You got to know she's in that elevator every time. God, I wrote down this movie doesn't respect the audience. It actively wants to annoy the audience and tell the audience that that's the point. And I also wrote, anyone who likes this movie has Stockholm Syndrome. They're like, I put too much time into this. I have to justify it.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't spoil it, but I would say probably 10 minutes from the end of the movie, there's finally one thing that happens in this goddamn piece of shit that's interesting. Something interesting happens. Finally, some conflict in this movie. Now, you know what that conflict is directly followed up by? No resolution whatsoever. This woman comes into a room, sits in the room, doing nothing for like 5 to 7 minutes, credits. And also, there's another scene in the movie of her just sitting in a room for 5 minutes. Doing nothing. There's no way this is someone's favorite movie. I can't believe it. If this is your favorite movie, you are too boring to live. I'm sorry.
Kill yourself.
It can't be. I want to know how this reached the top of this list. There has to be some groupthink going on.
I mean, what was the big outcome of it? Like, was it always have a pimp or something? Like, what was the lesson?
No. What's the lesson? That's a good question. I honestly, like, if there was a message of this movie, I don't know what it is, except that real life is boring a lot and sucks. I mean, honestly, like, again, I would love you guys to just watch first 10 minutes of this movie or as much of it as
like
you can
you
stand.
said, that's like 2 scenes.
Yeah.
Some washing of the dishes.
Exactly.
Some elevator trip.
It's so bad. And the thing of it is like, also there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie. Like, she has some dialogue with her son, and like occasionally she goes to the store and has dialogue with like the shopkeepers or whatever. But like, even like if it was like, oh no, will her son discover that she's become a prostitute? No, like I said, there's no conflict. There's never a time when you're like, oh, is something gonna happen? Is this gonna get interesting? No, it's not.
That'd be hilarious.
Steadfastly refuses.
If she has like one of her like, sex scenes, like she closes the door and hands him his jacket or whatever. It's all professional looking, and her son walks in and he's like, "Man, it smells like ass in here. What's going on?"
That would have saved the movie for me.
You selling booty?
Well, even like the very last scene, I'm like, are we going to hear the door of like her son coming up and that and be like, oh no, what happened in our minds or whatever? No, they don't even do that. It's just her doing nothing and the movie. I mean, God, I hated this thing. I really feel like this is it might be my most hated movie of all time. I mean, there are other movies that I've watched that are also like bad, but at least they're short. like that Robin Williams Popeye movie is fucking terrible. I also watched
Missing Popeye.
there's also Scarlett Johansson sci-fi movie called Under the Skin, which is also putrid and I hated, but at least there was some conflict in that movie. But oh man, what I want though, if like anybody is still watching this, if you like this movie, please, for the love of God, comment and tell me like what you liked about this. Like, I was just flummoxed. This thing ended, and I was like, how? How?
If I had a time machine, I'd go back in time and not do this.
Honestly, I would.
Was it all black and white?
No, it was in color. This movie came out in like the mid 70s, like 1975, I think. But like,
So those like 60 years of Citizen Kane, like later someone came and says, "Oh no, this is what you want." I was assuming it was something new.
no.
So was it on the list before?
I think it was on the list, but never in the top 10.
Okay.
Which reminds me of Patton Oswalt. He has like a joke where he's like, we have these like our lives are becoming so like crazy, and we're gonna start having movies that are just like monotonous, bland things, like Man Eats Cereal or something like that. And that's what this movie.
We already had it from 1975.
Yeah.
Maybe we could change our podcast to just 5-minute like shots of us doing nothing.
And they'll be like, "This is brilliant. It's
Yeah,
so
right.
avant-garde."
These guys need to make a movie.
Okay, so yeah, that's it. Please, like I said, if you like Jeanne Dielman, please let me know why.